Hello everyone and welcome to a new GG Shinobi Developer's Diary. You can see that we're carrying on from where we left off in the last Castlevania video with this almost miniature high-res Alucard walking around this 8-bit world. Of course, fans of GG Shinobi will recognise this as the third part of the Harbour level. What I've done here is to simply import the original graphics from the Game Gear game onto the end of my little new Castlevania demo. I just put this together as a quick little test, but in this video we're going to see some new graphical assets for the game, and those graphics will be much more suitable for a 16-bit console. I already mentioned a couple of videos back that when it comes to GG Shinobi I wanted to take the opportunity to make a brand new fresh start, because there are lots of things not only in the previous Shinobi build but also in the current Symphony of the Night build that I wasn't really happy with, and I wanted to try some new ways of handling the data and loading the data and so on, and that's what I've done here. So although it looks very simple, what you're seeing on the screen right now is actually a result of some experimentation, which I'm very happy with, and this will be good for not only the GG Shinobi project, which I'm starting from scratch here, but also the Symphony of the Night project too. Having got off to a good start with creating this new engine, of course the next step I want to do is to create some brand new assets, graphical assets to go into the game. Although the original is a good looking game for a Game Gear game, of course this is a remake and not just a port, so we needed some more like Revenge of Shinobi, Shinobi 3, Shadow Dancer type 16-bit graphics to go with the new game. Although I did previously try and do some new graphics for the game, I've decided to take a new approach, a more consistent approach, and that's what I'm going to explain now. What you're looking at here is a screenshot of the original Game Gear game. Now the Game Gear had a resolution of 160 by 144, which obviously the Mega Drive doesn't support. It's always a tricky business doing a port or a remake between two different systems with different resolutions, as the Konami found out when they tried to port Symphony of the Night to the Saturn. To the left of the Game Gear screenshot, this white box represents the Mega Drive resolution 320 by 224. Now one simple solution would be to keep all the assets the same size and simply increase the field of vision, but for a 16-bit game I think the sprites and assets will look a bit too small. Another solution would be simply to stretch it so that you stretch all the assets so that the field of vision will be the same as a Game Gear game, but they'll be a bit bigger. But the problem is, of course, is the aspect ratio isn't exactly the same, so you're not doubling the size or anything, you're just kind of warping the graphics in a not very good way. The solution I've decided to go with now, this new solution, is simply to double the size of all the assets. And the result of that is what you're seeing to the right of the Game Gear screenshot here. Horizontally, this works out perfectly, of course, because if you double the size, then the horizontal changes from 160, the Game Gear resolution, to 320, the Mega Drive resolution. Unfortunately, things don't work out quite so well vertically, because if you double the Game Gear resolution of 144, then you end up with 288. And of course the Mega Drive's vertical resolution is 224. This does mean that you're losing some field of vision on the vertical axis. While that's a bit of a shame, after playing through the game a couple of times, I'm pretty confident that it won't affect the gameplay. You're not going to have anything vertically from above that's going to be hitting you that you can't see, or there's going to be platforms you can't see, which was sometimes a problem with conversions from the Master System to the Game Gear, for example. Another thing I wanted to check was the sprite size, because although the big sprites look very nice on the screen, sometimes if they're too big it can affect gameplay. So here on the far left I have the original GG Shinobi sprite, on the far right I have the doubled size, then we have Alucard here, and then we have the Revenge of Shinobi and Shinobi 3 sprites too for comparison. Of course the double sized GG Shinobi sprite looks very blocky right now, because just as with the background graphics, if you double the size, the each pixel is doubled the colour, so it looks very blocky and low res. But in terms of actual size, he's just a little bit bigger than the Shinobi 3 sprite, so I don't think it'll be an issue from a gameplay standpoint. We just need to redraw the sprite eventually. Speaking of redrawing graphics, now let's take a look at the background graphics and how I've gone about redrawing those. I think the original artist did a great job creating Shinobi-like graphics on what would be a very small blurry Game Gear screen. However, when they're blown up to double size on the Mega Drive screen, they don't look so great, so what I've done here is to add lots more detail and colour. The process isn't too different to what I had described in the previous Shinobi video where I talked about a theoretical Revenge of Shinobi remake for the Sega Saturn. Even though I'm adding far fewer colours here to the Mega Drive version when compared to the Game Gear version than I did with the Saturn Revenge of Shinobi and compared to the Mega Drive Revenge of Shinobi, I think the difference is a lot more dramatic. With this barrel you can see that I've not only changed the colours but also the design a bit to make it a bit more like a realistic barrel. In order to test out these new assets, I just created a mock-up of one of the levels, and I just started inserting the new graphics next to the old ones. And seeing them side by side like this, I think you can see that my new ones look much higher res and much more 16-bit for a lack of a better word. I've also included this Shinobi 3 player sprite just to compare and just to make sure that the new assets are congruent with a kind of a 16-bit Shinobi aesthetic and make sure that they look okay together, which I think they do. Apart from the barrels and the crates, we also have these background details, which on the Game Gear version were very, very simple. They use basically these 3 colours, and there's not really a lot of detail and texture in these. For playing on a small blurry Game Gear screen, I think this wasn't much of an issue, but obviously once it's blown up to double size and you're playing it on a proper TV, a Mega Drive resolution, then they don't look too great. You can see here my new versions, and I tried to maybe experiment with some colour and maybe do like a grey silver version, but I think that clashed too much with the foreground, which you can jump on. Is maybe a bit confusing to the player. It makes the level less readable, so I decided to go with, you know, similar to the old scheme, the old color scheme, which usually is green, but obviously I've got many more different green colors to give it more of a texture, more of a 3D like effect. As well as pipes, there are also other background details. For example, these doors here, and the original was very simple. Again, I tried like a silver color too, but I think in the end I will decide to stick with maybe the green color just to make sure that the background stays in the background and there's a good contrast between the background, which is unplayable, with the foreground, which you need to be able to recognize what you can jump onto and what you can't. I also did the same thing of adding more color and detail to other elements of the background here, for example this railing at the very top. In terms of color capabilities, the Game Gear has a palette, a 16 color palette, which is used for the backgrounds, and then a 15 color palette, which is used for both the player sprites and all the enemy sprites. That gives a total of 31 colors on screen at the same time, and of course with the Mega Drive we can add another 2 palettes of 15 colors on top of that, so an extra 30 colors. While I want to generally stick with the original graphics and just enhance them, there are some areas, for example these platforms here, which I think maybe I need to completely redraw, because I don't even know, for example this little section here, I have no idea what it's supposed to be, so it's probably best if I just draw my own thing here. Apart from the extra colors, I also have 4 times the amount of VRAM in the Mega Drive than the Game Gear had, so there's lots of opportunity to add more unique tiles and new unique animations as well. When redrawing the new graphics, I've always taken some examples from the real world as well as from other 16-bit games too. Of course, it's been particularly interesting for me to look at different Shinobi games and see how they handle the graphics, see how much dithering they use, how they handled the colors and what kind of color palettes they went with. So I'm looking here of course at the Shadow Dancer arcade game, and this isn't a rip from the game itself, it's simply a screenshot from a playthrough on YouTube, so the resolution isn't quite right, it's much higher resolution than the actual game, but it's nice to see what they use for the enemies and which areas are kind of very plain and how they handle different kind of realistic objects in the game too. So I think it's a good reference to me if I want to make a game look like a Shinobi game. Obviously I need to reference Shinobi graphics. Here you can see some new assets for the first part of the Harbour level, and I've got these are using 14 colours so far, so I have an extra colour I can add here, and then you can see how I handle the palettes, and because each tile needs to use one particular palette. So, and if I, again like last time, I've created a mock-up of the foreground here, and I've placed my new assets next to the old ones. And just as before, I've tried to keep the basic design as close as possible, but just adding more detail, more texture and so on. Although I'm mostly sticking to doubling the size of each asset in the game, one thing that bothered me, even the original when I played it as a kid, was the fact that these shipping containers were the same height as Shinobi himself. So this was a bit of a, this always annoyed me when I was a kid, and it's not so realistic. And of course it's a game mode, so it doesn't necessarily have to be true to real life, but it's something that always bothered me as a kid. So in this particular case, I have changed the actual proportions of the asset, and I've made the shipping containers much bigger. And I think in this particular circumstance, it's not going to affect the gameplay. I just need to rejig the level a little bit, but I think it'll work out fine. So that's just a little annoying thing that I wanted to change. Another advantage of the Mega Drive, of course, is the fact that it has an extra background layer which we can use for some nice parallax scrolling and tile scrolling too. So I've recreated the background for the Harbour level here, and I think you'll recognize what kind of style I'm going for. This is based on a Shinobi 3 background, the way the buildings are. I've actually redrawn the buildings from scratch, pixel by pixel, but the actual the style of the buildings and the color palette they use is from a Shinobi 3 background. As you can see from the palette on the left hand side, I have another 4 colors left over, so I can probably add some more colors to the buildings, but I'll do that later. And if we take the foreground and just paste it quickly onto the background, you can kind of see how it'll look once this all brings brought together as one single graphic. Aside from the Harbour level, I've actually done quite a bit of work on the graphics on the other 3 starter levels too. However, since this video is already over 10 minutes long, I think I'll save those for a future video. Speaking of the future, for the first half of 2024, I think my main focus will be on the tutorials and also this GG Shinobi project, both doing the new pixel arts as well as doing the programming as well. And then in the second half of 2024, I think I can go back to the Symphony of the Night project, and hopefully I can integrate lots of the stuff I've learned from building this new engine for GG Shinobi, as well as other skills I develop in the meantime. And by that time, I think Pyron will probably have some nice new graphics for me to put into the game, and we can really make good progress on that too. So in terms of the channel, over the next few weeks will be the tutorials, and then I have my summer break, apart from maybe doing another Sega Saturn games in development video, which people seem to like last time. And then in the late autumn, probably around end of October, I'll start having updates on both Symphony of the Night and GG Shinobi project again. And at the end of the year, hopefully I'll have a demo, new demo, not just of Symphony of the Night, but also this GG Shinobi project too. Okay, so that's about it for this video. As always, thanks very much for watching, and if you're interested in this type of content, don't forget to subscribe.
I'm interested in this.
And for those of you who wish to support the channel, I have a Patreon, and any support is much appreciated.
You won't go unrewarded.
Until next time,
farewell.